Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our ReggieCon panel discussing The Wind Rises in celebration of Asian Pacific Heritage Month. This is our final ReggieCon panel for the spring semester, but don't worry, don't be sad. We promise to give you just as much energy tonight as we have in the past. My name is Jana Albrecht. I'm the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Illinois State University. Before we begin the panel, I have just a handful of details to keep everything running smoothly for all of you and all of us. First, we do record the session and it will be posted on the ReggieCon website. Second, if you need confirmation that you attended tonight's event, we will post a link to a form towards the end of the panel so you can complete that. Third, know that the presenters' video and audio are on, but we cannot hear or see any of you as guests. So, that said, we do monitor the Q&A function, and the panelists love to answer your questions. So you feel free to ask them early on, and as many of them as you have, they will get to your questions. I promise you that. Last update, that the ReggieCon website is out there, and you can see all of the panels that we have done before, and you'll be able to see anything that we do in the future. So please go ahead and check out that website. So enough of the housekeeping. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce our fearless leader, Dr. Scott Jordan. Dr. Jordan is the chair of psychology here at Illinois State, and he also happens to be our moderator and a panelist for tonight's discussion. Scott, do your thing.
Well, thank you so much, Jana, and welcome everyone to ReggieCon, the con that asks the question, what's your story? I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher here at Illinois State University. And tonight we come together to celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month with a discussion of Hayao Miyazaki's masterpiece, The Wind Rises. Joining me in discussion is that motley crew of pop culture aficionados, the one, the only, the ReggieCon crew. Mr. Victor Dandridge Jr., please come on in, tell the audience who you are, and tell them a little something about what you do.
Hello, everybody. I am Victor Dandridge, lovingly called the hardest working man in comics. I'm a self-publishing comic creator, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, self-publishing through my imprint, Vantage and House Productions. I also teach people the philosophy of storytelling through my You Create Comics line, officially making me a phenomenological narratologist and a super geek. So I'm super excited to be here and can't wait to talk about this movie because it was an experience.
It truly is an experience. So glad you're here, Victor.
Thank you.
Next in the ReggieCon crew, the queen of all things geekdom, Dr. Vanessa Hintz. Dr. Hintz, Vanessa, please come in and tell the audience a little something about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Good day, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dr. Vanessa Hintz. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, also a podcast host of the About That podcast. And as Scott mentioned, Queen of the Nerds. I too am excited for this discussion because I too had an experience watching this film. So thank you all again so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for being here. Next in the ReggieCon crew, the one, the only social psychologist of all, Dr. Eric Wesselman. Derek, Eric, please come in and tell the audience a little something about who you are and what you do.
Oh, good to see you all. Good to be back with the crew. Dr. Eric Wesselman. In addition to social psychology, I'm also a full-time nerd. I love comics, love movies. Been watching anime since 1993, so I'm excited to hang out and talk about that tonight.
It's fantastic, and glad you're here. And now to introduce tonight's special guests. We've had them here the past 2 seasons to discuss Miyazaki flicks. First, the one, the only, Dr. Tatsu Shigeta. Tatsu, please come on in, tell the audience a little something about who you are and what you do.
Hi, folks. It's great to be back at ReggieCon. My name is Dr. Shigeta.
Congrats, man.
Thank you. I come from a background of cognitive psychology. I actually went to ISU for my master's, so that's how I know Zombie Scotty and Eric as well. But yeah, I actually work in the data science space now at a tech company. I help data science team be successful with our software, and yeah, I also happen to love anime. for the longest time, my routine getting up in the morning would be make my breakfast and coffee, watch a couple episodes of anime, and that has not changed too much. A little bit busier these days, but still do it when I can.
Well, that's fantastic. Glad you're here, and congratulations on the doctorate. That's a big deal, and we're proud of ISU. Also joining us, the one, the only, Mr. Rio Shigeta. Rio, please come on in and tell the audience a little something about who you are and what you do.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
I'm Rio Shigeta. I am an actor by training, a salesman by trade, a dungeon master by choice, and an insufferable anime nerd by nature. It was really only recently that I watched this one, so I'm really excited to talk about The Wind Rises. More important than anything else that I've said, I am Tatsu's older brother.
There you go. Rio, we're so glad that you're here. So the room is full. Here we go. So we have discussed 3 Hayao Miyazaki movies. We've discussed Princess Mononoke. We discussed My Neighbor Totoro. And now we're discussing what may be his most controversial work. We'll figure out if that comes out in our conversation tonight. What I can say, I will say this is probably one of the most multi-scale, multi-layered scripts I've ever seen. And I think finding everything in the human condition in the story is an achievement. Now, usually on ReggieCon, we've read a graphic novel and everybody picks a page, we share it with everybody, and we talk about it. In this case, we've assigned a movie, so we don't have pictures. So what I'll do is I'll just ask our special guests first to tell us their favorite character, their favorite scene, their favorite line, their favorite theme, whatever they want to say about the movie. And then the rest of us will talk about it, and we'll go around the Zoom room, and I'm sure everyone will have plenty to say. So we're going to go ahead and start with Rio on this one.
Sure.
Rio, favorite scene, character, line, whatever.
So favorite scene involves my favorite character, who is Mrs. Kurokawa. So in Miyazaki films, women always the strongest characters. And Mrs. Kurokawa is the wife of Kurokawa, the superior of Jiro, who lets him and Naoko stay at their little apartment on their property. And my favorite scene is when they have the impromptu wedding. And Mrs. Kurokawa puts her in the beautiful dress, and like the lighting changes. There's like this filter, she's glowing, and then Mrs. Kurokawa like puts on this formal character and does this whole ceremony along with Mr. Kurokawa. It's so fun and beautiful, and I just feel like it brought a little bit of levity to a very sort of calm and serene movie for the most part. A thoughtful, pensive movie, but just a little pop of fun. I like that part.
Yeah, anybody want to follow up on the wedding scene?
The wedding scene was a notch of culture, if I can call it that, because by the way that it was enacted, and we have a ceremonial presence, but it seems like there were cultural allowances that made weddings easier, for lack of a better word. As long as there were witnesses to the vows, then the wedding was official. It didn't need to be officiated in the same way that we think in Western culture. And I love the idea of the traditionalist ideology at play, despite the fact that this whole movie is about this culture trying to embrace the future and modernize. He was like, "You can't stay in my house, you aren't married. Like, I'm not allowing it." No, what do you mean? Like, there was something so very sweet about that, whereas it was literally his job to move Japan as a culture and industry forward, but he still held on to these traditional ideas because he was like, "No, this is morally, the place that I, this is the hill that I die on." And it was kind of sweet. It was kind of sweet.
Meanwhile, his wife's like, yeah, okay, here's what we're gonna actually do.
Then y'all just get married.
I love how that scene opens up with him going through the tradition of asking for permission to come in. And so he's doing all of the aged experiences that he's supposed to.
Mhm.
And then, like many scenes in this movie, you know how people when try to teach you what a wormhole is and they put a circle on one side of a page and another, and then they roll the page and they put the two together. There's many scenes where they do that. By the end of this scene, he's crying. So it goes from this massive traditional space to a very personal phenomenological space. Just delightful. And getting there, the thing about Miyazaki is he always gets there without you feeling like you're being told. It just comes. And that's the beauty of the storytelling. It's just stunning.
And that's riffing kind of off what Rio said about, this is a pretty heavy story at different times, multi-layered, certainly. I mean, and this is a heavy moment, why they've decided to get married at this point. Are we okay with spoilers?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, she's dying, right? And we as the audience are going through that with these characters. And then you have the Kurokawas who not only add these nice little character flourishes, but some humor too, right? I mean, my favorite moment of that is when Mr. Kurokawa responds during the ceremony and is like, and there's a guy in here and he's an ignorant, chucklehead. If that's what she wants to marry, then come on in. And it was just, for me, at that moment, it provided that breath of fresh air to break the heavy emotional tension.
And at least the wife knew that that's what they were doing, right? The wife knew that. The husband, he went with the moment and went from tradition to tears, but she was the master in charge, and she knew what she was managing. It was fantastic. Anyone else on the wedding scene? Cool, then let's go to Tatsu. Tatsu, favorite line, character, scene, theme?
Yeah. I have so many. I have a line, but I love pointing this out about this movie because it's what makes Miyazaki unique. And you might have not even noticed this. It's basically like throughout the movie, you'll see here and there, if you're looking very closely at characters or objects, they're kind of moving a little bit, like every now and then. It's as if you can see like picture to picture, right? You're seeing that there's traditional animation style that literally you draw page by page. Miyazaki does this, I think, on purpose, right? I think part of it is, an ode to that tradition. Part of it is he is illustrating an era, right? The origins of anime, if you will. And I also think part of it is because Miyazaki's doing this while he still is technically active. At the time, this was supposed to be his last feature film. Right. And so he's kind of doing whatever he wants. And I think that just small little things like that are what makes this film so special. And I love that about it.
Yeah, you do see moments of background CGI, right? But you see very little. He used some CGI in Mononoke. I don't know if that was his first time using CGI. But I think the hand drawn still dominates, and
absolutely.
And I have to say, anime is going through a transition right now between hand drawn and CGI, and some of the CGI works and some of it doesn't.
And if you watch documentaries and hear Miyazaki talk about it, he kind of hates it, right? Like where he can, he avoids it, right? Because he'll talk about, other people that have just gone fully into it, including his son, which, that's a whole thing. That's a whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But where he can, right? Where he can, he tries to draw his work. And so you have to tip your cap to it, in this day and age where a lot of people are moving in that direction, because it's hard to capture complex movement. It's a lot of work, right? But it just shows how meticulous he is and how relentless he is at being able to show those details. And overall, right, this is a theme throughout Miyazaki movies. He loves showing the mundane and the not so, the ordinary, right?
Mm.
You go into rooms, people are just kind of living life, they're having a cigarette, they're just having a side conversation. Everything is always happening, and you'll see across different animes, right? People are usually frozen off to the side, not a whole lot going on. Miyazaki doesn't do that, right? It has to be perfect.
Does anyone want to kind of follow up on this idea of how the animation was part of the storytelling? Is that something that we'd want to discuss?
Well, I want to jump in on the style choice of Miyazaki, particularly when it comes to anime. And I think it's one of the things that makes Miyazaki's work so stand out. So much of what we experience in anime and Western cultures first started as a manga, right? So there is like a drawing template that is the design factory for how these characters are going to be perceived and how we recognize them. And Miyazaki, as far as I'm aware, is not a mangaka. So he is going directly into animation and yet has such a distinct style that you know his work when you see it, right? Even though there is like a literal team of people under him that are working to, match that style, you know a Miyazaki piece when you see it. There's a lightness to the line, there's a curve, there's a subtlety, all these different things go into play. And it's kind of amazing that much in the same way as Disney has a house style that we all kind of recognize, Miyazaki is that flavor with anime. And that's such a huge accomplishment where you can look at any number of his movies, and maybe at best you'll be able to say when it might have been in production based on some of the attributes of CGI or something like that, but you will always recognize it as his work, just from a visual presentation, not even the storytelling, which it also does, but from a visual standpoint, you look at it and go, that's Miyazaki. Like, that's impressive.
I was struck by what Tatsu, you said that this was supposed to be Miyazaki's last film. So that makes me experience some elements of the film in retrospect very differently. Like I can't remember the name of the Italian engineer, right? But you have at the end him telling the main character, this is my last plane. Yep. Right. And then, the artist is only created for 10 years. So enjoy your 10 years in the sun. I mean, I would be curious what degree of meta authorship is going on in this.
I might be able to elucidate a little bit of that. Let me nerd out for you. One of the primary reasons you invite me here, let me tell you about what was happening behind the scenes. So Miyazaki's plan was actually to write a sequel to Ponyo. That was what was going to follow the Ponyo film. Instead, he was convinced by Suzuki, longtime friend and producer, legendary dude, the one that sent the katana to Hollywood in protest of editing Mononoke. He said to Miyazaki, no, you gotta adapt this manga that you just did in Model Graphics magazine into a film. Miyazaki says, no. Animated film is for children. We don't make grown-up stories for that. This was just a hobby that I did. And he's like, okay, so movies are for children. We don't make them for adults. You are a pacifist and anti-war, and yet a total warplane and wartime machinery nerd. Check yourself.
Paradox.
He's like, fine. So he goes on to adapt this into this film, and I think part of that might have been why it was the film that he made before his retirement. He's like, well, this is the one thing that I have gotten to do that is mine, that I create for myself, in its entirely for the purpose of beauty. So his intent going into this was really just to create the most beautiful thing he could with his art, right? And you get that in the artwork, and he threw so much of his inspiration, the authors that he aspired to, the artwork is inspired actually directly by Monet. I included this background on purpose. This is Monet's, I think it's called Lady with a Parasol. I'm gonna check that. Woman with a Parasol, or Madame Monet and her son.
There you go.
And I think that ultimately that might have been his final. He says that it's embarrassing to say, but this was the first time that he was brought to tears by his own work. So I think this was sort of a culmination, and maybe he was done. But of course we know, of course he's not done.
Of course we know he's not done.
A decade later, this year, this summer, How Do You Live, I believe, will be in theaters. So he not done. He's not done.
Hey, Jordan came back. Why can't Miyazaki? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's all I'm saying.
And
I'm throwing it out there.
your story about how we got to this, there's a lot of him in Hiro, I think. In Hiro's case, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, throughout the chat, but we're talking about the creation of the Zero Fighter, which a lot of people may see as a scary thing. And, why is he juxtaposing all of this? I got to say, the commitment of Hiro to his craft is probably at a point where some people would say, oh my God, he needs to stop and he needs to be with her. And I suspect there were times when Miyazaki got home really, really late at night working on his work because it was his craft. And what I just loved is the way that their relationship let him be him and her be her. And that's, you can't ask for more than that in a relationship, right? So I do think there's some autobiography going on in the Hiro character, because I would love to see the page count of the sketches that got thrown away. And I bet you there's 20 per frame, right? That ends up in the film. That kind of commitment is definitely what we saw in Hiro. And I think that's on target.
Love that.
Yeah.
Anything else about the animation style or anything like that?
I guess the last thing that I would say about the animation style, which is kind of more of a theme as well, and kind of goes back to really kind of what Miyazaki is about, in creating these kind of fantastic worlds. Everything is kind of alive, right? He loves anthropomorphizing objects and landscapes and everything. Right,
crowds of people.
Yeah, you love that. Along with the detailed emotion is the experience of the sound, and this one especially, you hear people's voices, right, to kind of make it more alive. Like when the earthquake hits, it's humming, right? And it's you get the sense that like, oh, like this is kind of inevitable, right? Like you can't stop the force of life. So I just wanted to point that out, because it's such a kind of visceral experience as you're watching it, and it's just phenomenal.
That was a Miyazaki feature first to utilize human voices for sound effects. I'm not surprised that you noticed that.
No, that's fantastic. I got to say, one of the things I got out of this movie, through the animation and through the storytelling, humans are of, in, and about nature. They're not separate from it. So when you have the earthquake, right? Well, you have that as a force of nature, but the war scenes at the end are simultaneously forces of nature. And this dichotomy we live in the West it makes us put those two things apart. But I think in Miyazaki, that's why you have people that put together sound that look like clouds. He's putting us in the world in ways that I would say we truly are. And then the thing is, what do you do with that? And we'll talk about that as we go through. But what do you do when we're earthquakes? What does that mean to call us earthquakes? And I think it's just, it's why I'm drawn to Miyazaki. Princess Mononoke was the first thing I ever watched that was, okay, that's a Wild System story. It's clearly a Wild System story. All right, so we're going to the ReggieCon crew for lines, themes, characters. We'll start with Victor.
So I'm going to tell you, I had no idea what to expect going into this one. This was like a, blank slate. So I'm going in, and the thing that I loved is the theme of and Tetsuo just kind of talked about it, the live life aspect. This is a story that is not necessarily beginning, middle, and end for anything. It's an occurrence, and we're taking a snapshot of certain characters that are interacting in a series of occurrences. It's not a matter of there being even a protagonist or antagonist. This is like true life, and I think that is one of the things that Miyazaki captures so well in this particular story, that it's not actually about anything, but it's about everything. Right? Because it's not this war of man versus nature. It's not necessarily even a pursuit of dreams versus challenges. It is just an occurrence of these different characters interacting in different ways and finding how life just continues to move and where they are subject to finding themselves within that. Hiro, again, is this character that for the longest time has dreamt of nothing but wanting to fly, knowing that he has this limitation, a built-in personal limitation. I can't do that. Like, I cannot. But what can I do becomes the other answer to that, which is such a powerful thing where, how many people today are, oh, I don't have this, I don't have that. And that's the end of the conversation. That wasn't an allowance for Hiro. He was like, well, this is really what I want. I got to figure it out. What can I do? And hearing, even in his mind's eye, that his idol, Caproni, had never flown a plane. He's designed some of the best ones, never flown one. He's like, so I don't actually have to fly in order to still do this or be a part of this or advance it in some sort of way, impact it like I want to. That is both an alleviation of self-induced pressure that we all could learn from. It's again that occurrence of life living and the representation of it. I will sneak in there the presentation of Japan's journey that led to its participation in World War II, I thought was so very poignant because, in hearing some of the controversies about it, it's so easy from the standpoint of post-history for us to demonize actions and activities without understanding how did people get there? What was going on culturally, economically, all these different things that led them to this path, and was what ultimately we deemed it to be their intent with what they did. I think that's one of the most personal pieces. As I'm representing the series, The Trouble with Love, I had a very similar ideology when I was creating this. This is a personal story about an affair. I purposefully didn't make this character Black because I didn't want people to say this is what Black men are like. So here we are carrying an intent in terms of what my presentation of a story is, and saying, okay, let's tell an honest story about how we get here without already demonizing because we know the end result. Maybe we could learn something through this experience. And I think that is a huge theme about the occurrences of this story. I'll be quiet now.
No, dude, that's straight truth. That it's every level of being in this story is work. And what I love about Miyazaki's ability to tell a story, it's like you said, this is a slice through the tornado. Right? And everything's there. And these guys knew they were building war machines, right? As a matter of fact, what I love about Miyazaki is letting people just live in their contradictions, right? So in his first dream, Hiro's thinking about a plane, and then I just Capaldi, is that his name? The Italian builder, they're talking, and at the end he says to Hiro, planes are not for war, planes are not for money, planes are beautiful dreams. But yet the first thing we saw 3 minutes ago were his war planes, and the point is that's how we live, right? That's how we live. And your comment about the history of Japan, that's how people are. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on in the United States right now where our military's out in the world doing stuff. We're all living our daily life.
Right.
Right. and we live our daily life and we have a story about what's going on out there, but we don't stop living. We don't, most of us don't anyway. So just to be able to jump in that space, let all the contradictions just run through rampantly, love it, and then say, that's the story. It's just bold. I'll say that for me, this is his boldest work. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Rito, please.
Yeah, on that and sort of contradictions and what I think Miyazaki's intention might have been with this. So the title, The Wind Rises, it's from Tatsuo Hori, who is one of the inspirations of Jiro's character. Jiro's actually part Jiro Horikoshi, who was the engineer, and he's part Tatsuo Hori, who was a novelist, one of whose novels was The Wind is Rising. And that title actually comes from a poem of a French poet, Paul Valéry. And Paul Valéry's poem, The Graveyard by the Sea, is a very sort of visual metaphor of one standing at the edge of the ocean with, your mortality behind you and existing in the face of the wind from the ocean. And the quote that the title comes from is, "The wind is rising, we must yet strive to live." And I think that's the theme here, is that, in the face of wind, we are both reminded of our smallness against nature, but at the same time, it reminds us that we are alive. We are, flesh and sensing creatures, and therefore we exist because we feel the wind. At the same time, we must face what is before us and what is behind us, our past and those we have lost, and our future and the headwind against us, and yet we must strive to live. Naoko's last words to Jiro: live on. You must continue to live. After all of these things, the most beautiful thing you created never came back to Japan and destroyed so many lives and things. And I am now gone, and yet you must live. I think that's sort of the contradiction in the face of past strife and future consternation. Somehow, as humanity, we continue to live on. I highly recommend reading the poem. It's so visual, nice. It's so visceral, it's beautiful.
Love that.
Yeah, and this movie's kind of a love letter to that contradiction, right? It's trying, I would say, trying to teach. It's the belief of transcending contradiction that leads to other worldviews that allow other sorts of dehumanizations to happen. I mean, Miyazaki was inspired to make Mononoke by observing some mutated minnows in a small pond. And he said, life finds a way, not Jurassic Park that way, but it's just live is work. And yeah, it's a hard lesson, because the mind wants to collapse into, a space, a good, a bad, a right, a wrong. And he doesn't let anything happen. He keeps you guessing the whole movie.
I think that's part of the important part, culturally speaking. I read a couple of reviews of people talking about, they felt that this was a diminishment of Japan's place in World War II and the atrocities. And immediately I went on a judgment factor because it was an American critic. And I'm like, and yet, are you on the picket lines when there are atrocities against minorities here in this country? Are you talking about the history of America and the atrocities that it has committed against its own citizens? And yet you have the audacity to judge this impression of a story. Again, Miyazaki, as a representative, is not aiming to tell the story of Japan. He's telling a story that takes place in Japan. Get it right. Don't put that yoke on his shoulders. It's not for him to speak for the entire country, culture, population, citizenship. None of that. He's telling a story that exists within this culture. It doesn't make it any less or more true than anything else that has happened. Just taking the story, like live in that. because that is the story. It
Yep.
is a number of things that are happening, and this is mine. That's it. Not good, not bad, not good, not protagonist, not antagonist. This is
No.
just me.
And it's those bubbles we have to create that we live in. Those are the illusion,
Yes.
not the contradiction, right? So
And-
we've not, go ahead, please.
One of the things that I've kind of like been spinning on is it's sort of in the background, because the characters that we're focusing on, right, although they have their stressors, seem to be, compared to, you know, their fellow citizenry, pretty privileged.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, as far as we can tell, right, the two main engineers, their houses were not obliterated by the earthquake or the fires. They still have their jobs,
Mhm.
right? And there's like this one particular moment when the main character is being picked up by his friend, and they're going to the new place and talk, you know, and there's people everywhere. And they do talk about the banks closing and all these other things,
Mhm.
right? And so
Mhm.
there are people who are starving there.
Yeah.
Right. And these folks, they're creating, but they're also getting paid to do that. We,
Yep.
you know, so I can sit there and I can judge, but I'm also not starving. Right.
Right.
And so I think it's, yeah, I would have liked to, I would like to know more about that time in history,
Mhm.
and those dynamics.
I do think that's the point of this story, is to get you to wonder and then give you the opportunity to go and explore. You know,
Yep.
he's not trying to answer it for you. He's telling you about it, and then you go, well, then let me go find out. Let me ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Victor, because this isn't a story about World War II, right?
Right.
And what Miyazaki does actually is shows you how industrious the Japanese people are, because he shows you the Tokyo fires, right? That's a real thing, and he shows you piece by piece, like how fast they were and how industrious they were to be able to and resilient they were to come back from that, as if, you know, nothing happened 2 years ago, right? Like Jiro's sister comes to visit, and she's like, wow, like I can't even believe there was a fire here. And if you go and look into history, you'll see much is the same after the bomb was dropped,
Mhm.
right? That exact same things happen, because that's what Japanese do as a people.
Mhm.
Is they organize, they see something happens to them, right? And of course you're going to mourn, of course you're not going to forget, but that doesn't stop them from organizing and being industrious and fixing the problem to make it better on the other side. And that's what I think Miyazaki's highlighting here, without having to directly address it.
You know,
We
there's
must yet strive to live.
and you know that plays out at the level of individual life and culture. In other words, the two engineers keep saying to each other, my God, we're 10 years behind. And on the one hand, it's like, well, maybe you should just not care about it. Well, if you don't care about it, things will happen to your culture, right? Because there's just powers are going to develop that are going to have an impact on your culture. So the things that our individual cells are doing in our bodies, our organs and our cells, is happening in a larger group. And interesting from a Western perspective, when I would say something like that, I'd say, oh, it sounds like you're justifying violence. And then it's like, no, I'm not justifying violence. If a group wants to live, if a system wants to be a system, it has to generate and sustain borders. That's it. You can't have a system without borders. Something that doesn't have borders is not a system. And so what are the consequences of that? Well, everything we see in this movie, all of it's there, non-judgmentally. And then we bounce around like a ping pong ball trying to figure out what the right thing is. Absolutely love it. So look, we're going to do something unprecedented in ReggieCon history here. Amber Stojak is asking us a question, and it's so relevant to what we just said that I'm going to throw that question out there. So Victor and I are currently teaching a class where we're trying to use graphic novels to teach students how to conceptualize othering as a sort of multi-scale system. and the idea that all living systems have to have borders, or they're naturally othering systems. So that's why the students got the word othering in the question. So when you're diminishing something, are you othering it? Because it's not as important to you as it is with someone else, so you don't relate with it?
That's a great question.
Yeah, jump on it.
All right, so yes, by diminishing it, you are in fact othering. But again, I always want to point out that othering is not an inherent negative. It is a system of separation, right? So if I'm diminishing something, I'm separating it from my scale or hierarchy of importance in this context because it is not as important to me. So therefore, in my system of placement, it is put on a lower scale of something that I'm paying attention to. That is not necessarily a negative to connotate any sort of other value structure than how it fits into my ranking of importance. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
If it is more important to somebody else, then it clearly is and would be and can be allowed to be higher in their ranking system than where it is in mine, because it's just another idea of that thing. So it is not a cognitive necessary like negative statement. It is just a system placement of, oh, this is where you are. Like, boom, this is it. It's no different than when you wake up in the morning, you could very well plan for what you're going to have for dinner in the morning. There's nothing to stop you from doing it. But chances are you're going to figure out breakfast first. And it doesn't diminish the importance of dinner. It just means that breakfast at this time has a higher ranking in your cognitive systems because it's more valuable to you in the moment. Like that's the first thing you're going to eat. So dinner becomes lower in scale. It's not any real different thing other than the time period of when you eat it. It's still, figuring out food. It's still something to nourish your body. But the idea is because I know I'm not going to do that until later, then it's now lower on my system and it's othered for breakfast.
Unless I'm planning to have sushi for dinner, then I just end up eating sushi for breakfast.
Nothing wrong with that.
There you go. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Victor. So Dr. Vanessa Hintz, favorite line, scene, character from The Wind Rises.
Okay, so first and foremost, I must preface this. So I've been watching anime since 1990 never. Like this was my actual first experience. This was my first experience. And so that's why I've been sitting here listening, because I literally, I was just telling my best friend this weekend, that's one of the great regrets of my life, is that I feel like I did not get on the anime train. And so this was actually my first experience outside of like a handful of Sailor Moon episodes when I was younger. But this was literally, so I had literally, like Victor said, I came in, I was like, I don't even know what's going on. I was gonna sit here and I'm gonna watch this film, and it was like dark, and it was okay. So the first thing I noticed is how vibrant the colors were. Like immediately I was sort of like drawn in, and I was like, oh, this is like so great. So I would say favorite character would have to be the sister, the younger sister. And it's because she said she wanted to go to medical school, and she did. And that was just everything to me, particularly at that time in history.
Yeah.
But I would say in terms of, okay, favorite scene would have to absolutely be the last scene of the movie. And it was that moment when he saw his wife for the last time. Because honestly, like I literally had no idea what was going on. Like I literally was like, what is happening here? And then in that scene, I literally just sat where I was for like 10 minutes. I didn't get up because I was so like moved, but also stunned, but also like, what was this, in a good way. So I think that last scene, because I was having difficulty with his doing his thing while she's just kind of laying here all day. And I had to check myself in the moment, like, that ain't my relationship. Like, why am I getting upset by this? Like, that's the thing, and then in that last scene when it sort of all came full circle and he was talking to the Italian engineer guy, and then she came, and it was beautiful. But I will say again, this was my first experience. I wish somebody would have warned me that it was like so much. I was not ready. I absolutely was not ready. But it was beautiful. So I'm gonna stop rambling. But for me, that would be it. Favorite character and favorite scene.
If I had known this was gonna be your first anime, I would have suggested Cowboy Bebop or something. just to get yeah. But Miyazaki really is. It's almost as if anime is his medium, right? He does anime, but his storytelling is so qualitatively distinct from most anybody I know that it's almost like anime is his medium more than him being anime. As a matter of fact, and I'll say this and shut up, his most violent movie is Princess Mononoke. And he specifically said in that he was sick and tired of all the violence in anime. So he says, if you're going to do violence, I'm going to show you how it works in anime. And so people are shooting arrows that are cutting people's heads off, shooting arrows that cut people's arms off. At the same time, there's narrative structure to that violence. I'm not going to say that violence in anime doesn't work, because I watch a ton of it and it's extremely violent and it works. Yeah, starting with him is, you'll have to, when you try other stuff, you have to let us know if it feels like it's better, or what it feels like, because this Miyazaki's kind of it for me in almost any screenwriting genre.
I definitely need to take a small break. I need to take a small break because that was a lot on my soul. I will take anybody, send me the recommendations. Find me on Instagram, send me recommendations, because I'm ready to continue. I just need just a small break.
Yeah.
So Grave of Fireflies next.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
Don't write that down. Do not write that down. Do not write that down. No.
That's anime like 305. Let's not go there yet.
Well, when they were
You're gonna need like 3 months to recover.
Yeah, no, that's not even 305. That's AP anime. Yeah.
And they were showing the city burning at the end, and they were showing all the destruction. Image of 2 kids came to my head. Right. It's like, oof. And then someone was talking earlier, and I said, yeah, that's where you almost went Graveyard of the Fireflies. It is probably the saddest thing ever put on film. Yeah. Watch it once, and I don't think you'll need to ever watch it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that is actually a great juxtaposition to this movie, because that movie is about World War II.
Yes.
Right. And what happens when you do that to a people. Right. So this is the opposite of that. This is showing you what life was actually like, right, for people of that era prior to, right? There were still hardships, like that never goes away. But certainly, yeah. I think more than anything, though, kind of going back to what you're saying, Vanessa, like, you don't know what was going on because Miyazaki just plays with essentially all of your senses, right? Like he plays with it, with your visuals, he plays with your sound. You feel it, right? You actually like feel it when Jiro's walking with Naoko under the umbrella. You feel the vibration of the raindrops. Like it's just like, it's an experience, and you almost, like, if you're watching it for the first time, I can only imagine, like, you can't like remember everything because there's just so much going on at once. And so yeah, if only I could go back. I'm sure it was amazing.
Yeah, and I'll say too, and something I think is related to what we were talking about earlier. There was a scene between the 2 engineers, and I remember one of them said, "I don't care about war. I just want to build good airplanes." And I remember I had to check myself in that moment too, right? Like, as a descendant of an oppressed and enslaved people, it's like, with great power comes great responsibility. Like, you knew what them planes were gonna do, and again, it's not for me to demonize them, right? Because they did want to build good airplanes. And so I think even my experience, there was so much tension for me watching this film, because I had to check myself. I had to check what I thought about anime and like how it was going to be and what I was expecting. And then also sort of like the themes in the film, like you said, there was so much that I feel like that's why I was just stunned afterwards. I'm like, I don't know how to process this. So I appreciate this conversation, which is why I'm kind of quiet, because I feel like it's giving me an opportunity to process through some of this. So thank you all for also indulging me in my anime.
I love it.
We love it. We absolutely love it.
I think one of the things you're getting into is the theme of progressive submission that is pervasive throughout the whole thing. In order to move something forward, you have to submit and not let your personal desires kind of get in the way of what it is that you ultimately want, right? So, you know, him saying I don't care about war means I'm not for it. Like I'm not here for that. But if that occurrence is the only way that I get to make these beautiful planes, then so be it. That's what I have to submit to in order to allow that to happen. That's on like a macro level, but on even like a stellar romantic level, when Jiro and Nahoko were together, and she's like, "Hold my hand while you work. I want to be here where you are while you work." So she, in her sickness, is submitting to her feelings for him. So she's willing to give up being in a space that is supposed to be for her max healing to spend time with him. And him, in his effort to pursue his dream, handicaps himself by trying to do this with one hand just so he can touch her. Like there's a mutual level of submission from both of them that says, I'm willing to give up something so very important to me to just feel you. And that is love goals. That is relationship goals. That is huge. You know, that is two people, you know, oh, babe, I got to work. Okay, cool. I'm just going to sit by your computer and read just so I'm near you. How cute is that? Like, come on. That's beautiful.
And if I may sort of jump off of that, there's a mutual acknowledgement of interdependence.
Yes.
Right. So there's submission, but I mean, both acknowledge the sort of creation at the end of that. I think Jiro was like, I couldn't have done this without you, right? And I think even after he comes home and he's like, they're going to fly my plane tomorrow, his wife said, we did it, right? So there very was much this sort of collective interdependence acknowledged at a linguistic level.
Yeah, I really like this concept of submission. It's sort of adapting to the reality of the constraints you're in. And there's nothing, even planes don't get to be non-contingent, right? The planes crash. Almost every plane we see crashes, right? So there's a holism there that nothing transcends contingency. Everything is in a reality of contingency, and believing in a realm of non-contingency might be a Ponzi scheme. Go ahead.
This is the last thing I'll say about it, I promise. I appreciate you bringing up the idea of submission and interdependence, because I think on a meta level, that was where I was like, no, because I shalln't submit. You know what I'm saying? And I think that again is me. That doesn't have anything to do with this. I don't have anything to do with this story. And so that's why I think I identify with the sister so much, because she gave him the business. She's like, you just going out and you're staying and she's just here. And I was like, yes, ma'am. And then, you know what I'm saying? That I don't have anything to do with their relationship. So it's not for me to place a value on it just because it's not what I would do. And so I think that even in this moment, even in this conversation, right, appreciating that, to Victor's point, just because I don't value that thing doesn't mean it's not important, or doesn't mean it's not right in this situation. So thinking about submission in that way, just because I say that that's not something that I want or would do, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. You know what I'm saying? Which is what the experience I was having in watching the film.
Yep. If you ask Miyazaki who he is in the movie, I think he'd say everyone and everything, right? And that's, I mean, how many of us have had the opportunity to read stories where we can't find the author, right? That's also the point. So again, this is why this guy's number one on my list. How about you, Eric? Favorite line, scene, character?
So I was torn between a sentimental moment and a artistic, unique to animation moment, and I think I'll pivot to the animation, since we've talked a lot about visual media this season that has been sort of still images, right? Animation is a series of still images that make up a whole in a different way than looking at frames on a page. And there are multiple times from the beginning of the movie where he plays with reality in terms of narrative structure, of the scenes bleeding into one another. But the one that really struck me was his visual depiction of the earthquake. with the actual ground, like someone grabbed a blanket and shook it, right? The only earthquakes I've been in have been very small, and I've not been able to perceive the ground, so I don't even know what it would actually look like. But I think you could only do this with animation or an amazing CGI author, right? I mean, I'd like, but just to be in that already sort of suspension of disbelief space, right? Like I didn't know if that was really what was going on or if he was dreaming again.
Right.
And so it took me a bit to sort of wrap my mind about it. And I've seen the depiction of this earthquake in other anime, like Doom Megalopolis, but never in this way. And I really, really appreciated the uniqueness of this format.
Is this magical realism? I ask.
Well, it's kind of like what Tatsu said, right? About the bringing the earthquake to life, making it an agent. Yeah.
Well, because I kind of was, while watching and debating, like, is it magical realism like we get with Haruki Murakami or Banana Yoshimoto in that it's like hyper real, so much so that you're so close that you're actually seeing the waves of an earthquake differently? Or is it surrealism in that the magic is just coming in his dreams, it's all in his mind? But I think from what you're saying, Eric, it is outside of his mind. We are seeing it visually in a magical, fantastical manner. So while it is so realistic and so grounded in terms of characters, especially compared to any of his other films, it also has that fancy, the sort of like spirituality, I guess, of Japan, of these characters, of this story. Yeah, I don't think I understand what magical realism is, but I think this might be an example of it.
I think you definitely are right, because I would qualify magical realism as a way of describing an event to contextualize not just the event itself, but the response to it. So as Eric was saying, any other depiction of this would probably have the ground cracking, falling apart and disappearing, and it's so destructive. There's an aspect of this that's like it's a bed sheet that has now been disheveled, right? And so now the bed is unmade. And what the culture, the people of Japan are going to do is they're going to remake that bed. And it's going to be stronger, crisper, better looking, but it's not gone, which is what we would have seen in more Western depictions of destruction. This wasn't about destruction. This was about dishevelment that can be corrected. And it was corrected. And this is what they did. And again, in the time frames that even in the story, they say 2 years later after the fire, I wouldn't even know that this was here, because that's all the system was dishevelment. You disrupted us, but you didn't break us. You didn't destroy us. You just disrupted us like a wrinkly sheet. Let me fix it, lay it straight, and then we can start building all over again, because that's the culture. That's what you do. You don't look at anything and go, oh, well, it's broken, we're done. There is a specific art form, and forgive me for not being able to call it right now, but like something broken, thank you, is its own creative accomplishment now. It is not broken, it is just different. And there's beautiful there.
That's fantastic. This is also one of the scenes where I think cell animation and CGI are incredibly well juxtaposed, because the tectonic plates, they've got to be hand done. At least the red, it looked to me like it was hand drawn, which gets to another thing I love about anime, which is the scale of the frame rate. So since they use a very slow frame rates on occasion and then speed it up, they can really manipulate the psychology of the moment. And then it went into that roller coaster CGI stuff. And I have to admit, I saw this in the theater when it came out. They actually showed it in town here. And I didn't know what to make of that scene. Am I seeing an earthquake? Is he dreaming? Kind of like what you said, Eric, because it did have that fantastical feel. And so I kind of post-processed it with the train falling apart, with then all the things that followed. Okay, so that wasn't a quote unquote dragon, that was an earthquake, right? Yeah, just fantastic animation work.
I feel like, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I feel like Miyazaki, right? He's told by his producer, you should make something that appeals to your love and your hobbies and adults, even though you're saying it should just be for children. And Miyazaki saying, I see you and I raise you this, right? The whole fact that like realism bleeds into fantasy, right? It's so childish in a way. It's so
Mm.
wonderful in a way, right? And he's showing you that, like he's showing you that it all kind of goes together. Maybe as an adult you don't see it anymore, and you see that in the people, they're just kind of living life. But the
Mm.
kids see that landscape, when they're in an earthquake. I've actually been in a fairly big earthquake when I lived in Japan as a kid. That's how I remember it, right? Like I'm in the hallways of my elementary school. This earthquake hits. It felt like I was surfing, and I was like,
Mm.
wow, like this is kind of cool, but also terrifying at the same
Mm.
time. You know what I mean? But that's it really kind of brought me back there. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how it is.
Mm.
So just wanted to point that out.
That's fantastic. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you my favorite scene, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience. So my favorite scene is another wormhole moment where Hiro is on a train writing equations, crying. So everything about his life is there, right? The equations, those are his craft. That is his work world. And then you see the puddles of water start to fall, and you think, is it raining? And then you realize he's crying his eyes out. And that wormhole moment of connecting all those parts of his life at that scale, I mean, that's the scale of tiny, tiny drops of water and little pieces of lead. Man, that's just brilliant, right? The whole story is in that moment. And all the work that had to be done to make a man crying on equations in a train mean that much is what good storytelling is all about. And personally, I'll just say, as someone who is ambitious, someone who does spend a lot of time working, I didn't mind seeing someone portrayed like that in a movie, someone who wasn't out conniving, someone who wasn't out stealing, someone who wasn't out trying to be the boss. It's just someone who was so caught up in what they do. It's just the edge of their mind. It's the edge of their skin. And that's where they live. And he found someone who understood it. And that's just beautiful. So that scene was it for me.
I'm glad you brought that scene up, Scott, because that was my other choice that struck me too. As someone who has a tendency to have a very hyper focus on things, I can certainly appreciate Jiro's sort of general focus, but also in that moment, right? I mean, he didn't know. All he knew from the telegram was that his fiance at that point had a hemorrhage.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know if she was still alive or not. And he got the first train out, but he had to sit there and he had to wait. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And just, he could sit there and he could perseverate, or he could retreat, quote unquote, to his work. And I don't want to use actually retreat, maybe not be the right word, because that almost sounds negative, but sometimes you need something to distract you, to focus you in that moment. That's what he needed. I thought that was just a beautiful juxtaposition of him sitting in that tension.
And if I may add to that, Eric, because as a clinician, I think oftentimes, again, and maybe this is like a westernized notion, but like, you got to face that. Don't be doing those equations. You just better sit there and deal with it. He was dealing with it. And I think that what you just described is coping. And I think what we in the Western world do, and even in like modern psychology and modern counseling, is there are good and bad ways to cope. And I would, you cope how you cope. And as long as you're not endangering the welfare of another person or doing something to another person against their will, cope how you cope. And I think that what you just described, Eric, I love the way that you mapped that out, because again, I think that in that moment, he was coping, but he wasn't ignoring. It's not like he was doing the equations and it's like, all of this is just out of my mind. I'm managing in the way that I need to manage in this moment. And who are who is anybody to tell him that he shouldn't be doing that, that he should deal with it a certain way. And so just, from a clinical perspective, I think that this is a beautiful way to sort of, again, juxtapose this to what we typically think of as healing in the clinical space. Because I think, again, any counselor therapist would maybe say like, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. You need to face this. He was facing, you know what I'm saying?
And who's to say that in the process of what he was doing, he wasn't getting certain things out of the way so that when he got there, he could devote his full attention to her. Like, not only did he get his work stuff out of the way, he got his own trepidations and fears out of the way so that he can focus strictly on her. That is a level of cognitive forecasting that I think everyone could do well to deal with. When you go, I'm going to cry now because I know I need to cry, and I'm going to get this out of the way so that when I'm there for you. I'm there for you. I'm in the moment with you. There is nothing else that's taken, not even my own feelings. I am literally submitting to my future self by doing this right now. So I can take care of whatever that might be when I get there. That's dope.
I'm gonna piggyback on that and really bring it to a wormhole. And I think in that moment he's feeling a little bit of that. You have 10 years of being creative, right? And that, I think that's part of that emotion, right? He's working on things, but he realizes that, oh, like I'm coming towards the end of my 10 years, and this is what happens, right? You actually start to have to feel feelings, right? Because you can't just lean on being creative anymore, right? You're at the end of the road, and you have to come to terms with that. And whereas you've just been trucking forward, you've found love, and you've been able to work that into your creativity, but you have to come to terms with that. And he didn't know how to, except for how he dealt with it in that moment.
Exactly. And in addition to writing symbols, in addition to preparing himself to have time when he was with his wife, he was also simultaneously moving his culture forward. I mean, all these different time scales of work were in what he was doing at that moment. And not only, you're right, the idea that his time was running out, but the dude also knew he was the one who had it. He was the one that was going to do the thing that would make this work for his culture. And all of that work, all those different scales of work, and what we do, we traditionally don't call all that behavior. I would, right? All those different scales of behavior are in every one of those little symbols. And yeah, this fantastic stuff.
Amazing.
So look, we got a couple of questions here. It's 10 after 8, so this will work well. The first one comes from Olivia Hauser. Says, Dr. Westerman talked about how the creator of this anime plays with your reality during the story. Do you think that this thoughtful disruption of reality allows the audience to surpass some of their own other contexts and ideas they hold about reality and be able to redefine them to gain new understanding? Victor, I think they're learning something from the course.
I mean, hold on now. Listen, it sounds like we got some student teachers that are electing themselves for next quarter.
So is that perhaps the purpose of a creator altering reality in this way?
Yes. And I'm guessing the fact that you asked the question, not answering it. I'm gonna let other people get on that one.
If I may, I would say that I definitely had an experience like that. Again, I think I prefaced some of it in terms of, I think anything that I experience that is outside of me is another reality, obviously, right? And what I do with that, I think is in this case, again, I could say, oh, that's wrong. That's not what I would do, so that's wrong. Or I could, like we talked about earlier, I could demonize, say, oh, World War II. I could do all of that, or I could just sort of engage with this as something other than me, and not place it on sort of like a value system, or, and I feel like there were so many layers, even you talk about wormholes. For me, watching this film, anime version, like what is going on here? You know what I'm saying? And then all of these different aspects and all the different things that I was experiencing as, me in my context, right? And so I do think that I think that is why I do what I do in terms of like being a pop culture psychologist, because I think that these stories, art, music, movies allow us space to do exactly what I did, which is to really engage with other realities in a safe way. Like me listening to someone tell their story in a very real way is different than this.
Mhm.
And so I don't even remember the question, but that was my experience in terms of how I think that what this film like conveyed challenged my ways of thinking and ways of being in a good way. I don't want to say good, in a way. I'm just gonna say in a way.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, most of the time, most everything we do is on autopilot. I'm sitting here talking right now. I have no idea how my mouth's moving, how my breath is working. And these conscious disruptions we see in art, they disrupt, they bring it to consciousness. And it's in that space, then we can consciously entertain alternatives. And then if we work hard enough and live that way long enough, those conscious alternatives can become our memories, and they can become, how we get through daily life. So yeah, disruption is important. Art does it all the time. And I think we tend to overcognize how we get through the day because most of it's just floating on autopilot.
And I think that when you look at Miyazaki's work, Miyazaki is a phenomenal storyteller and filmmaker, right? But to say that is a contextual aspect of process and being, he could very well have used live action and tried to capture reality versus use animation to create reality. So he absolutely is aiming to create a sense of altering and othering that shows you something that's there and real, even though it's in a space that is not real. That is the methodology of his work to begin with, because he could have very well just picked up a camera and started shooting, and I believe he still would have told great stories, but it's not the vehicle and process work that he's using in order to create that space. That's why he's in animation, so he can create the reality that he wants to show you.
You know, when you listen to Miyazaki characters in a conversation, they're very rarely talking clearly to each other about the same thing. I think of the scene where Jigo asks his Kaboshi if a young man came through town, and he said, yeah, came and went. That's not what Jigo wants, but that's what she wants. And that's how we talk. And the thing about this movie and disruption is all these behaviors we're seeing are straight up everyday behaviors we do all the time. And Miyazaki's just laying it out, and you can find Easter egg contradictions. You know, the Italian guy saying, you know, planes aren't for war or money. You know, he just saw his own planes dropping bombs in a dream. So he just lays it out there and masterfully, and then you get to find it. You know, and that's something you said earlier, Victor. There's an invitation to see, and then to look further, and then on top of that, it's entertaining. Damn, it's quite the thing. Got another question from Nora O'Donnell. Could that scene, and I think we're talking about the one with Jiro on the train crying while he's writing the equations, could that scene be societal othering because other people on the train saw him as an isolated, lonely man?
Yeah. You know, the context of other people who don't know his story because they haven't watched this anime, they're living their own life. They can see it and have a context that is othered from ours because we have a different context. You know, for them, what if it's culturally inappropriate for a man to sit there and cry in public like that without trying to shield himself or anything like that? That's possible. You know, that is a contextual bit where someone could have looked at him and gone, ooh, like, sir, go to the bathroom with that, or turn around, you know, something like there could be any number of contextual ideas. And that's from anybody on the train. That's not just, you know, Japanese citizens that are on the train. That's anybody that could be on there. If you think of the hyper-masculine alpha male structure that we tend to see guys, you know, poke their chest out with today, they would have looked at him like, who's this guy crying, doing math for? Boo, boo. Not recognizing this guy is literally taking his country into the future. And at the same time, losing his heart. Like he's losing the love of his life at the same time. You explain that to somebody and dare them to be like, so you shouldn't cry. You punch in the face. Like, get out of here. Get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. All of lived life, all of it there in the one scene. Just,
Absolutely.
brilliant. I don't have any more questions from the audience at the moment. Unless someone has an issue. Does someone have an issue about the show that they'd like to raise and discuss? Okay, what I'll do is I'll throw a topic out there, and we've probably already talked about it. So if it's a non-starter, it's a non-starter because, like I said, I saw this when it came out. I want to say 2013, and I will admit, it all the things that Vanessa's telling us it did to her, it did to me. Everything. Wait a minute, you can't celebrate the Zero Fighter. What? You can't do that, right? And then, as you said, I check myself. And then when I go looking beyond myself, when I go looking for what I think Miyazaki's doing, it then, as you guys have so skillfully said, it's not a story about World War II. It's a story about a certain period in a culture. So I don't know if that's a non-starter. It's a non-starter. Questions or responses, comments?
I will say also, Scott, just to give you your props, you did tell me I should watch the movie twice before we had this conversation. I'm hard-headed, so I was like, what? I don't need to do that. It's interesting because when I read the description, I assumed it was going to be a movie about World War II. And so even at the beginning, when the earthquake happened, I thought that was like a bomb situation. And I was like, what? And I had to rewind it a couple of times because I was like, what is happening here? And so it was interesting because I feel like I was trying to fit what I thought the film was going to be about onto the story. So when I say like I was confused, it was because I was like, this movie is about this. And that's not what I was saying. And so I had to even check my sort of phenomenological being in the moment. Like, can I just be and watch this movie and like not try to figure out what's going on? Like, and I think again, there was so much context because I wanted to come into this conversation and have something to say, and nobody wants to just hear me ramble about whatever. And so I think it was to that. I don't even remember your question, Scott. See, I'm just rambling, but I feel like for me, I think that and I think also you giving me that like disclaimer, like there's a lot going on here. I think I was sitting there like trying to take notes and figure it all out. And so I kind of wish, I think, Tatsu, you mentioned this earlier, I wish I could go back and just watch the movie for the first time again and not have all of that, like not be in that space, because I definitely think when I watch it again after this, I'll have a very different experience, but it will never be the first time. It will never be the first time again, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you get to watch Princess Mononoke for the first time, and that's something too.
Scott already set the bar way high for that. So I'm greatest film ever made. Like
greatest film ever made.
No, Vanessa, you don't understand. You don't understand. That's Scott talking about it. Don't let these two get to talk about Princess Mononoke. You'll be like, I'm not going to watch anything else. Like I don't need to watch any other form of entertainment other than Princess Mononoke when they start talking about it. Because I've seen it so many different times, but hearing Rio and Tatsu talk about it, I'm like, I've never experienced this movie. Like not really experienced this movie. They hype it up. Like that's best friend action. Like it's good. It's good.
You know, one of the things you said, Vanessa, about reading the description, I don't know, wherever you saw the description, there's a whole podcast or something to be done about Western descriptions of anime plots, right? Because I bet you there's so much that's lost in translation, just completely lost in translation that English words really can't deal with, because it's set up to divide body and soul, right? The language is set up to keep those things separate. Whereas in Japanese culture, it's not set up to keep those things as separate. And so how do you tell someone that in English, right? You just can't, it's very hard to do.
And the description was on HBO Max, and it was literally one sentence, and it said, a young boy is interested in aviation like before wartime or something like that. And so the fact that he was a young boy for like 2 seconds, I said, this is the same person? Like I was so
and it this point about the cultural embeddedness of stories, right? I mean, there are so many layers these things are going on, right? There are the words that you use, there are the cultural symbols, right? And so sometimes when I teach anime, I like to show like the first minute and a half of an episode do Megalopolis, which has no word dialogue whatsoever. It's just like this tracking shot into a Shinto shrine with a whole bunch of visual references to set up a story that if you don't know those, you don't get it, right? And so actually, I'm curious. Some of Miyazaki's films, very much like Totoro, for example, is just Shinto in your face, right? This one, I only caught maybe two moments that really struck me. One is when she's praying at the stream, right, thanking the kami of the stream for bringing Jiro back to her. But then there was at the beginning in the earthquake, and I was, of course, still trying to just understand that entire scene, right? But there's a scene where I think they're at a Shinto shrine, very briefly, and like statues fall over, and I'm just, they chose that scene for a reason, like that location. And I'm just, as someone who's not outside of that culture, I'm not sure why that might be. So I'm just curious what other people's reactions to that might be.
I'm gonna say there's Shinto everywhere, but I'm gonna let Rio take this one because I know he's got a take.
Well, okay. I mean, and just as far as our discussion so far, I feel like it should be noted how much of an exception this film is to much of the rest of the Miyazaki canon. Like, Vanessa, I feel like it's a very interesting experience that this is the first one that you watch, because the others are going to be this is sitting in a room by yourself with a cup of black coffee and a book in a foreign language. The other Miyazaki films are running through a candy shop, music blazing, and there is no limit to what you can have. It's entirely different, and this is really a grown-up film. But back to what we're saying about Shintoism and where it is in the film, I think the focus here is different in that we're looking at Taisho and Showa Japan. And that is a time when Japan is very much focused on progress. And I think that Japan is very aware of old world and new world. It does not condemn old world to become new world. Now, that did exist in the form of the imperial army and a power grab and a forsaking of traditional culture and the people in order to gain power and dominance in the world. But like we're saying, that's not what we're looking at in this film. We're looking at Japan as it existed, the Japanese people as they're existing as a whole, as a creature, and it's there. It is Shinto in that it is a moving, living being. The people are depicted as these moving masses. They're organic. They are part of it, but it's in the background. It's an undertone. And even the scene that you're talking about with Naoko, praying, it's more she's at a wishing well. It's more fantastical. I don't even know that, aside from just the cultural basis and perspective that Miyazaki's coming from, that Shintoism was really even here. This manga was the second one that he wrote and presented to the same magazine. The one that he did before that was Porco Rosso. And you can sort of understand the similarities, fighter planes and war. But that one, we start with the main character is a pig. And he flies planes. This one was different. This one clearly was not intended to be one of his films. This was, I want to show fighter planes. I want to show an engineer. I want to show a story about a man and a woman and humanize the experience at the time with multiple layers of literature, referential literature. I'm confusing myself. Referencing other literature and finding sort of the core. I don't even know how he did this. He took two completely different people that existed at the same time, the engineer and the writer, And then another engineer sort of beyond time from another country that comes in dreams and kind of tells him about what he does. And then another person from out of another story as the romantic interest and brings them all together to examine this. I'm getting off topic. My point is that I think Miyazaki is at this point sort of, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Shinto's there, and it's not.
Mhm.
It's like we are Shinto, but we're looking at something else. So this is through a lens looking at the progression of Japan.
Yep.
So we are Shinto as the viewer. So you might actually not find what you're looking for in the film because you might not have that basis knowledge of what Shintoism and belief in existence with nature is, I guess. I talked way too much to hopefully answer some of your
No, I
questions.
think we just heard a few mics drop. I think that was a fantastic answer. And I'm looking at my clock here. It's about 8:26. So I think we're close to bringing this wonderful conversation to an end. I do have to say there is a podcast to be done about American descriptions of anime plots. When I rented Princess Mononoke for the first time in 1998 on DVD, it was a picture of Ashitaka on the front holding his sword, and it said the Star Wars of anime. There's a woman's name on the cover with a picture of a guy holding a light. So yeah, I'm sorry to throw that out there. So look, this is our last ReggieCon for season 3. And it's just been another fantastic season. Before we get off the air, I do want to thank the people behind the scenes who've been helping us all year. I want to thank Summer Simmons. I want to thank Danny Schroeder. I want to thank Kelly Harmon. I want to thank Angela Davis. I want to thank Dr. Laura Finnan. And I want to thank our dear friend, Dr. Jana Albrecht, who introduces all of our ReggieCon panels for us. Thank you so much. ReggieCon crew, guys, an amazing season. These conversations have been fire. We're getting them posted to YouTube, as soon as we can. And they're doing well. So thank you all very much for being here. Any final comments on the season, if you like? You don't have to. I'm just saying, if you want to.
I just want to
wait for season 4.
Give Scott a shout out for moderating all these panels.
No, guys, this is me writing equations on a train crying, guys. I do cry on trains, and I do cry on my work on trains. So thank you very much. And Victor, I know you were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just saying, just wait till season 4, y'all.
There you go. Fantastic. Rio, Tatsu, it's always a blessing to have you guys join us for this particular ReggieCon. Again, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Oh, you'll see me again.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We'll be back.
All right. So it looks like we have another quick question here that we will answer. And then we will understand I've done the thankings. We'll answer the question, and then we'll say thank you. Have a good evening. So Sam Braun asks, how do characters show othering in graphic novels such as Sita's Ramayana? We just had a whole conversation about Sita's Ramayana.
I was going to say, we can't answer that question yet. We will answer that question next week because we've only had 2 practitioners answer that via video. So we want to wait till next week's class before we answer that one.
Okay. Thank you for answering that question. To all of you out there in the audience for coming, thank you so much. Have a good evening.